Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Father-Son Packers podcast, your source for Packers news, notes, and analysis. My name is Tommy, and I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, my dad, Matt, for a very special free agency window edition of the podcast. Dad, how are you doing?
I'm all right. Ate too much pizza for dinner, but other than that, because it's pie day, so I had pizza pie.
That's true. It is Pie Day. We are here recording to you, like my dad said, evening of Thursday, March 14th. So, as you're listening to this, we are here to talk about the Packers free agency window. Dad, it was a wild one. We have so much to talk about. I think maybe let's just start it off. I mean, highs, lows, roller coaster.
Emotional roller coaster. Yes, emotional roller coaster.
Especially that opening Monday. But, Dad, I guess let's just, before we start getting into any of the details, just want to, let's do the usual intro. If you like what you hear here today, come give us a follow on Twitter at FatherSonPacker. Subscribe on your podcast platform of choice. We put all our episodes on YouTube as well. But, Dad, we got so much to talk about. I'm going to cut the intro short, and I'm just going to touch on this.
I'm actually going to say one more thing. Even if you don't like what you hear, give us a follow.
Subscribe. That's a good point. That is a good point. Follow us anyway. We tweet out, when
follow
we do
us
episodes.
And tell us what you think about our episodes.
Yeah, tweet out when we have new episodes. We tweet out articles we find interesting, piece of Packers news, which is like, it's news season. The free agency window is not done, but we got to talk about the moves, and we put it on long enough. We got to talk about them. But before we do, just one little piece of Packers non-free agency related news. The Packers have officially made all of their coaching moves. They announced them on Twitter the other day. An entirely new strength and conditioning staff, not just a new strength and conditioning coordinator. And then the other bit that we didn't know about was that Ryan Mahaffey, one of the two, is going from being an assistant offensive line coach to the wide receiver coach, while Jason Vrabel is going from wide receiver coach and passing game coordinator to just passing game coordinator. So those are the updates there. But Dad, that's small potatoes. Let's start talking about the big stuff. We got additions, subtractions, don't have any multiplications or divisions that I know of yet. But let's start talking. Before we even talk about specific players, let's just walk. I mean, Packers fans know, but let's just walk through the highs and lows of that Monday. Because obviously, I honestly feel like in terms of legal tampering windows, really quiet first few hours. Really quiet. The only thing we really saw was the DeAndre Swift for the Bears, and then one other smaller move, and then like nothing for like 45 minutes. And I'm just over here refreshing Twitter like, all right, someone give me something. I need it. And then I see Ian Rappaport tweet, or surprise, like Josh Jacobs heading to the Packers. And I was like, Josh Jacobs? The running back? The running back, Josh Jacobs?
You're like, after we said, there's no need to sign a running back in free agency. And then there was this brief window of, oh, wow, two-headed running back monster. Josh Jacobs and Aaron Jones will both be playing. That's going to be, they'll both be able to give each other breaks. It's going to be a great way to run the offense with both of them. You can have both of them out there at once.
We had the greatest running back duo in the league for like an hour or like 45 minutes. It was amazing.
It might even be less than an hour.
But then, so we got the up from that. I would say a tentative up. I was kind of skeptical, and we'll talk about the signings in detail in just a sec. I'm still, feeling my way out through that. The fan in me is excited, and the person who's more into the numbers is a bit concerned. But so we had that little up bit. And then immediately, you assume like on a roller coaster, you're going to climb for a while and then just come crash. We went down right away. Aaron Jones released. If you missed this, I'm sorry to break the news to you here. It gets worse. Don't worry. He signed with the Vikings. Infinitely worse. Although I will say, having seen Drew Holiday go from the Bucks to the Celtics, nothing can hurt me anymore. But yeah, so that hurt. Reports are that they asked him to take a pay cut on Friday. And he said no, which is totally reasonable. He took a pay cut last year of $5 million. They wanted him to take a pay cut reportedly of around 50% of his salary for this year, is what several people are reporting. And he said no. And then they decided to go to the Josh Jacobs direction. So it sounds like the intention was never to have necessarily a two-headed monster in the backfield. It was initially to bring Jones back at a lower number. And then when that was no longer an option, they went the Jacobs route. We'll be talking about Josh Jacobs more in detail. But Dad, how did you feel when that happened? Because I was a little bit heartbroken. I felt sad.
Yeah, I was like, man, this sucks. I mean, other things you knew were going to happen, like that the Campbell getting cut and Bakhtiari getting released. Those things you were pretty sure were going to happen. But Jones, they'd been talking, well, we want to bring him back. yeah, we're working on the salary, but yeah, he's going to be back. We'll figure it out. Even though, Tom Silverstein at one point said, and even possibly cut him. And then it was like, nah, that doesn't seem likely to happen. Um,
Yep. But I guess
so
it is
I
just
think everybody was just expecting to work it out. And then, nope.
yeah. And so we were low. We were low for a little bit. We're just walking you through this Monday, and then immediately back up about like an hour later as Xavier McKinney, who I think was the person that we had our eyes on the most for that safety spot. Packers come in with a big free agent market deal on him. He was the top safety there. They paid him like the top safety there, and they went and got the big fish at that safety spot in free agency, which, the Packers usually don't do. They're usually shopping in that second tier. I kind of thought, when Winfield went back to the Bucks and McKinney became like the top available safety, I was like, well, probably going to end up getting outbid for McKinney. Better start looking at those second ones because he's someone that we talked about in our, favorite free agent targets. He was my pick. I'm going to, toot my own horn a little bit here.
Shout out.
We missed
myself.
entirely otherwise, but don't worry about the misses. Just look at the hits.
Well,
but
it was the one we had at the top of the list overall. But the other thing is, especially after hearing, it was like, it's like both the Packers and the Eagles are going. I think it was the Eagles going hard
those
after
are the
him.
two.
And it's like, I don't want to hear any other team named.
Yeah, and it was like, dang, usually when you hear like Packers and, it's like, dang, we're like, it's going to be tough for us to outbid, but that immediately back up. And super excited to talk about that. We'll be going into him in detail. But that's just kind of, a walkthrough of how wild that Monday was. And I mean, just up and then down and then up and then down again when Aaron Jones agreed to sign with the Vikings, which, made me even sadder.
Down again on that one.
But yeah, so a bit of a wild ride for us, for sure. But Dad, let's just start talking about these moves for the Packers. Let's go one by one. Let's start with the losses because, the ones we talked about already, I was just talking about Monday. Those were just the moves and also there were some other moves Monday, but that's just kind of illustrated the roller coaster. But Dad, let's go through these moves one by one and talk about them a little bit and talk about our thoughts on them. And let's start with some of the, the downers. Let's start with the players who are unfortunately leaving the Packers. And let's start with the one that we heard about first, which was Devontae Campbell, which we kind of heard about this past weekend, that the Packers were planning on releasing him. They ended up cutting him with a post-June 1st designation. The big reason they did this one was actually like, it always sucks to see players get released, but this was one that we kind of saw coming in terms of cap hit. So they cut him with that post-June 1st designation, which saves about $10.6 million of cap space in 2024. Still a $3.6 million cap hit in 2024 and an $8 million cap hit in 2025. But I think we all kind of saw this coming. He had fallen off a bit from his first 2 years in Green Bay in this last year. Only played 11 games last year, and even when he was playing hurt. We talked about this a lot in our big defensive recap if you want to go back and listen to that one. But these numbers are per PFF. After being one of the best tacklers in the league his first year in Green Bay, he was 42nd in missed tackle rate this past year at 9.9%. Then, he was 76th in the league in yards per coverage snap this past year after being 10th in his first year. And so, it had just kind of been, that first year here, first team All-Pro, like one of the best linebackers in the league, never missed a tackle. Everyone was like, where did this guy come from? No one knew he was that good. Second year, I think last year you would say 2022, less good after getting that contract extension after that 2021 season, but still, a pretty solid linebacker. And then this past year was a bit of a struggle for him, I would say, Dad. How did you feel about this release? How do you feel about the move here? I feel like it was kind of expected. What do you think?
It was expected like in the beginning of the offseason. And then I was like, well, maybe now with the new system, they're going to want more off-ball linebackers on the field, in general. They'll still be, spending a lot of time in nickel, but more, 3 off-ball linebackers for some of the downs as opposed to 2. So I thought maybe they'll keep him. And we didn't hear anything for a while. So it kind of like, well, have they decided to? But I think, but I guess they decided it was time to go on. There was going to be, more money than the quality of play they were getting. And and whether that was because of injuries or not, I guess they decided he's maybe not going to get more healthy next year.
I think
so. Either way,
ideally maybe you would have found a way to like restructure it or have him take a pay cut so you're not as thin at linebacker. Definitely the linebacker room is thin now with just Quay Walker and Isaiah McDuffie and then Christian Welch, who we'll talk about at the end. But he was going to hit
Yeah,
14 mil on the cap this year, which it wasn't tenable. It just wasn't going to work. And
right.
he was playing at
and there's
like
also a
replacement.
decent cap hit next year. That's gone as well.
Yeah, I mean there is still, I believe, a cap next year. A cap hit next year is just much
Yeah,
less than it would have been. It's still around.
it's much
I
less
think.
because
Yeah, exactly.
and that's because of the June 1st destination, which essentially lets you split that dead cap upon a player leaving the team over 2 years instead of taking it all at once.
Yeah, exactly.
It's still
But
the same amount of money overall. You just spread it out.
yeah, so I think not a whole lot to say there. His play had kind of declined the last 2 years, which, partially due to, like he said, playing with injury, but only played in 11 games this past year. It was going to be tough to retain him at that number. The next player that we had to say goodbye to, this was another one that we kind of saw coming, was the release of David Bakhtiari. Dad, you have the details on this one. This was one of those ones that definitely hurt, but it was also one that I think didn't quite hurt as much as Aaron Jones because we kind of saw it coming. It was kind of something that writing had been on the wall.
It's more the writing had been on the wall for a while, especially after one of Gutekunst's pressers after the season, where he said it's going to be a while before he even starts, practicing again.
Yeah, and then we had that Rob Domofsky report that was like he's maybe going to be ready for training camp, and it just felt like the more we heard about it, the tougher it was going to be for the Packers to keep him around. In terms of this cut, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, and so that was the big thing about how long before they'd even know if he's going to be ready. The way the contract was structured, it was all salary, and none of it was guaranteed, so no bonuses coming in at any time of the year. So they could have waited until the last minute, just for the season and still get the same savings on the cap. But they wanted to be able to use it in free agency.
Yeah,
and by cutting him, they saved like 20.1, 20.2 million on the cap, somewhere around there. That they, I think, wanted to spend right away. If they had decided, well, we're going to save the Jordan Love's extension, then they could have maybe waited a little longer. And the thing is, he still played really well last year. We talked about it. He actually had the best pass blocking grade for all offensive linemen, but he was only able to play one game.
And my counter argument also is a lot of players would have the best pass blocking grade if they got to play just the Bears with no Montez Sweat just in a row, right? But no, he played well when he was on the field the past couple years. He played well when he was on the field the past couple years, and it's just tough because you saw that the talent is still there. It's just his body won't let him. It's still around like a $19 million dead cap hit, if I remember correctly. But they do just save just a ton of money.
Because it was going to be about $40 million cap hit for an offensive lineman this year. It's like quarterback level cap hit because they kept pushing so much back. It's not that they were going to pay him $40 million this year. They paid him $20 million earlier and decided to wait to throw it on this year. And that's what I think people got to remember when they're talking about cap hits. It's like it's not that they're giving him that much money. They just decided to pay him early, and then we're not going to count it yet. We'll wait. We'll count it in a couple of years.
Yeah, and
which is a weird thing, which is I think a very strange thing the NFL lets teams do in the first place.
No, someone said that someone was talking about the NBA like salary cap is like French, but the NFL salary cap is like hieroglyphics. Like it's just a complete spaghetti to like go through how pushing cap out works, how bonuses work, how cutting and restructuring void years. It's just it's kind of crazy, to be honest. But I will say, it's been litigated to death, the Bakhtiari thing. I think, that injury in 2020 is one of like the big sliding doors moments of Packers history, and what would have happened. It could
be like a season of what if on like, Marvel what if.
Yeah. It's just one of those things where, I mean, just to wrap this up, because I don't think we want to spend too much time talking about it because we've talked about it a lot before, but my thoughts on it is it was time, it sucks. But it is what it is,
Yeah, it cut short what could have been a Hall of Fame career. But, we have talked about that a lot before. So the others, the great Packer that left the team now, or was cut from the team, is Aaron Jones. He was released and then signed with the Vikings, as we talked about. That move saves the Packers $5.2 million on the cap this year, though they still are carrying $12.8 $4 million of dead cap on this year's salary cap. But they also saved $6.6 million next year. That would have been the dead cap from the void years coming due after 2024 was over. And
Yeah.
as you mentioned, the reports were that the Packers wanted him to take a 50% pay cut.
Yeah,
more than a 50% pay cut.
And he took a pay cut last year for them, so it makes sense why he wouldn't want to take one again. It's one of those ones we talked about already. Kind of soul crushing a little bit. Seeing him in the purple sombrero and the Vikings introductory press conference today definitely hurt. Not gonna lie.
I think he said skull too.
Yeah, that definitely hurt. Didn't love that. It sucks because I think the big thing is, and you have some numbers here, but I think the toughest part for me is reconciling the idea of like, yes, the data is bad on running backs over 30, and he's going to turn 30 this next year. But at the same time, how good he looked down the stretch last year, where he ended the season having 500 straight 100-yard games, and how important he is to the locker room, I think is even the bigger thing.
Yeah.
And so on its face, it makes sense, the idea, that you're not paying for past performance, you're paying for future performance. So having, age 26, 27, 28, Josh Jacobs is probably, a better investment than having age 30, 31, 32, Aaron Jones. But it's always tough because, you want your team to get better. And I do feel like Aaron Jones right now is better than Josh Jacobs right now. And so if I'm looking back to like last year's team, if I slot in 2023 Josh Jacobs instead of 2023 Aaron Jones down the stretch there, I think the team is worse. But, I think there's a solid argument to be had that 2024 and 2025 Josh Jacobs will be better than 2024 and 2025 Aaron Jones. But Dad, you had some numbers about, age drop-off stuff, which, is all very valid. Do you want to run through it?
Yeah, so this is, I'm sure, what the Packers are looking at. So you hear about this all the time about running backs hitting the wall and not even sometimes age 30 wall. But I found an interesting article from a year ago from apexfantasyleagues.com where they just using, so let's just take, think what you want about fantasy production, but looking at overall running back fantasy production, which doesn't capture efficiency, but it does capture workload and availability. If you're looking like total points produced for the year. And this is just from, so this kind of says who's the real workhorse and is actually doing a lot for their team. So this is from 2010 until last year. I added 2023 in as well. They're using a cutoff of 250 fantasy points per year, which on average gives about 7 players per year. So it's like the top 7 producers per year, rushing, receiving, touchdowns, etc. That gave 94 players. Of those 94 players, the most common age amongst those 94 players is their 25-year-old season, with 19 players. As they get older, by age 26, there's just 13 players. By age 27, there's 7. Bumped up a little bit, age 28 with 9, and those like 4 in the same year, kind of weirdly. Then at age 29, there are only 2 players left. And only 1 player at age 30, Adrian Peterson. So if you got a freak Hall of Famer.
Yeah.
And then the other outlier is at age 31, Raheem Mostert just last year.
Which is just bonkers to me because, just as a quick aside, like he was someone who was famous for being injury prone for years. And then all of a sudden, age 31, just plays every game and is a stud. I mean, I just wanted to think about how odd and unlikely that was. And it kind of, just points to the fact that these things can be unpredictable, but they are rare. They are very rare.
Yeah. Also, in the last 4 or 5 years, there are only, I think, 2 players over the age of 27 on that list, if you go even more recently. So then the age is dropping even more. And then so that's sort of the general trend. Then if you look at Jones's own trend of his sort of overall production, using kind of fantasy number as a proxy, in 2019, he was 2nd overall in the league. 2020, he was 5th. 2021, he was 11th. 2022, he was 9th. And then last year, he was 37th.
This is in total, fantasy production.
Fantasy points. So, yards from scrimmage.
Yeah, and,
touchdowns.
like you said, fantasy points, not a perfect metric, but, it's correlated with, good running back stats like, yards per carry and touchdowns. and it indicates availability, like you said, because you're able to get those volume counting stats. And so I think what a lot of people, forget about Aaron Jones with how amazing he ended the season last year. And the offense was night and day with him, which I think is something that's a little scary to think about. Is like, is the offense going to look the same without him? But at the same time, he was really limited for like almost the whole first 2/3 of the season. And like he was barely out there after week 1 for like 8-9 weeks there. And when he was, like I'm thinking about that first Lions game where he had like 4 or 5 carries and he barely could like touch the ball, and the hamstring kept flaring up on him, and it was looking like, it's like, are we gonna get him back to full like speed by the end of the year? And thankfully we did, and we went on that awesome run, and he closed out the year so strong, like playing out of his mind. But it is something to think about. That's probably what the Packers are looking at, is like, hey, like, he's not getting younger, and he missed half the games last year. And it's just like a cold part of the business, and it sucks for the fans because,
yeah.
I mean, I just got an Aaron Jones jersey. So it's like, I feel like partially, number one, I might be a little cursed. Number two, it sucks for the fans because exactly, I have a Devontae Adams jersey. But no, it sucks for the fans, but like, it makes sense when you think about it analytically. But at the same time, does that team rally from 3-6 to make the playoffs without Jones's leadership? I think that's like another aspect of it that I think about, is like, are they able to bring themselves out of the depths of like a really terrible record and playing, like we said at the time, one of the worst teams in football? I mean, everyone talks about it, but that moment where he like grabs Dontavian Wicks' face mask after Wicks had that weird fumble against the Rams where the ball like bounced up in the air, and like physically lifts his head up and says like, get your head up, we're not out of this. Like, if that doesn't happen, does Wicks close the season as strong? Like, if that doesn't happen, are we as excited about Wicks going in next year? And I think those are valid questions. I'm sad, I guess, is my feeling on it. He's one of like the best Packers and most fun Packers I've got to watch like the past like however many years it's been. But like at the same time I understand it, but at the same time I'm sad. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, and he's been a lot of fun to watch, and especially this year. And I think one thing that a lot of the fans were thinking is like, okay, keep him around, maybe reduce his workload, and he can have another stretch of he can be that efficient that he's actually really productive for the time he's in there by not getting used quite so heavily. So that's one thing that I think fans are ready to do. It's like, oh yeah, keep him, but just don't wear him out, and we can maybe get some more of those fantastic play, some more of that fantastic play we got. The other thing that is kind of hard to measure, and what you talk about is like, how much better can you measure how much better players around him play because he's there, which is almost impossible, which is basically impossible to do.
Yeah, I mean, I think we can easily say that the offense was a lot better when he played. Now, whether or not that has more to do with,
just
Dylan,
how well
maybe
he played.
not just how well he played, number one, and number two, the replacement, like Dylan having a poor year. And so maybe if, Jacobs isn't as good as Aaron Jones was down the stretch, but he's like 90% of that as opposed to, Dylan being more like 70% of that. Is it like enough? I don't know. That's just something we're going to think about, but we should probably move on to the additions. But anything else you wanted to say about Jones? I mean, I feel like there's not a whole lot else to say. I understand, like I said, I understand the idea behind it, but it doesn't make it suck any less.
No, I think we could go on to the new players who've been added.
Okay, well, let's move on to some of these free agent additions. And the first of those to talk about is Josh Jacobs. We talked about it for a little bit earlier, but just some details. It is a 4-year, $48 million contract for Josh Jacobs. However, that number is pretty fake. It is only $12.5 million guaranteed. He's only going to count $5 million against the cap in 2024. Pretty much what most people I've seen who know what they're talking about have said is it's pretty much a 1-year, $14.8 million deal, and then 3 years of like, we'll see. Like, if you're playing well, like, we'll keep going down this road, and if not, we'll say our farewells. So if you see that 4-year 48 and you're like, holy crap, why are we paying him 4-year 48? We're not. Analysis wise, so I feel a little iffy on the addition of Josh Jacobs. All cards on the table. I feel iffy about the addition of running backs and the paying of running backs from a team building perspective as is. I think if you want to fix that, they need to raise the rookie wage scale for running backs. I think is the best way to do that. But Josh Jacobs, so looking at it, was pretty bad in 2023. Per PFF, among 59 qualifying running backs, he ranked 50th in yards per carry at just 3.5 yards per carry. That's really bad. So 50th out of 59. He was 53rd in yards after contact per carry at just 2.35. So bottom 10 in both of those. Per NFL Fast R, amongst those same 59, he was 50th in EPA per carry and 46th in success rate. And then per next gen stats, he was, this was not amongst the same 59 running backs. I think this was more around 50 running backs, but he was 41st in rushing yards over expectation per attempt. So per a lot of, traditional stats like yards per carry, and then advanced stats like yards over expectation, EPA per rush, he was bad. And he wasn't just bad, he was a bottom 10 running back in a lot of these metrics. But in 2022, he was a superstar. He was first team All-Pro. Per PFF, among 61 qualifying running backs this time, he was 12th in yards per carry at 4.9. He was 11th in yards after contact per carry at 3.4. He was the rushing leader. I think he ran for like 1,600 yards. He was 25th in EPA per carry. He was 11th in success rate, and he was 11th in rushing yards over expectation. So he was like top 15-ish in a lot of these like efficiency metrics while also having crazy volume. Now the questions are, why did 2023 happen? There's a few, theories to go through. The first is that the 2023 Raiders were really bad, which is an accurate statement. But I will say they weren't great in 2022 either, to be fair. So here are some numbers to kind of track through like whether or not that was the reason that he was so much worse in 2023 and 2022. And I actually want to preface all of this with, before the 2023 season, he sat out of training camp because the Raiders, he was going into his fifth year, and the Raiders, fifth or sixth year, and either way, the Raiders used the franchise tag on him, and he wanted a long-term contract, understandably. They did not want to give him it. He sat out of training camp, and he eventually reported, but he missed a lot of camp, and there were reports that, he came in maybe a little bit out of shape, he didn't get a practice, etc. So that's on the table. So here's some theories for why he would be able to bounce back from that 2023 season, or just to why that 2023 season was so bad. The first was, like I said, the Raiders' run blocking was really bad is the first theory. However, here are some metrics. 2023 Raiders were 14th in run blocking per PFF, so right around average. For reference, they were 17th in run blocking grade per PFF in 2022. And I'm going to give a lot of numbers, like I'm not just going to lean on PFF. Per FTN Fantasy, they were 16th in adjusted line yards in 2023. So again, right around average. They were first in 2022. So that probably helped his 2022 season be, that successful. They were 25th in power success rate per FTN, which is third or fourth down with 2 or fewer yards to go, or first and second in goal from the 2-yard line or closer. So pretty much just to sum that up, just short yardage runs, how well they succeeded on those, because the theory is that the line is to the reason that you're able to get success there. But either way, they were 25th in power success rate per FTN, but they were 23rd in 2022, so not a huge difference. They were just slightly worse there. They were 16th in stuffed rate in 2023 after being 6th in 2022. That is the percent of runs where the running back is tackled at or behind the line of scrimmage. So they were right around average there as well. And Jacobs was 32nd in yards before contact per attempt amongst those previously mentioned 59 running backs, while being 24th in 2022. So looking at a lot of those numbers, to me, it seems like, the Raiders' run blocking wasn't great and maybe a little bit worse than it was in 2022, but it was still around an average run blocking line for the most part. Now, those are just by the numbers, and some people are of the opinion that the numbers don't portray the fact that the Raiders' run blocking was pretty bad, and some people are saying, oh, he's getting hit in the backfield a lot, but, to me, the stuffed rate kind of shows that that's maybe not necessarily the case from an efficiency perspective. There are a lot of very bad run blocking lines in the league, and it's not like the Packers' run blocking line is some juggernaut, so it's not like he's going to come here and immediately have some massive upgrade. So to me, the idea that the Raiders' run blocking in 2023 was like so abysmal that like he couldn't do anything, I don't know about that. I know some people have that take. I'm a little on that take. It also, shows in the fact that other running backs on the Raiders were better. While Jacobs had 3.5 yards a carry, Zamir White had 4.3. And while Jacobs had 2.35 yards after contact per attempt, Zamir White had 3.21, so a substantial amount better. The second theory, so I'm kind of on that. The Raiders' run blocking was really, really, really bad.
But you should mention, as you got in there, that White did face fewer stat boxes.
That's a good point. Like you said, per next gen stats, Zamir White faced 15.38% of the time he had a stacked box, so 8 or more, while Jacobs was around 21.46%. So, and that's the second theory is like, oh, he faced a ton of stacked boxes in 2023 after his amazing 2022. But, that doesn't necessarily hold up either because while he did face a stack box rate of 21.46% in 23, he's at 20.59% in 2022. So very similar. And he's just more successful in 2022 against those stack boxes. The last one is, that the number of carries that he had and the heavy workload he had in 2022, as well as, coming back maybe a little bit out of shape, slowed him down in 2023. I think this one feels the most to me because it did seem to me watching him that he looked slightly less athletic. And just to put a number on it, we looked at, his longest run from each season in 2022 and 2023. And so that's the 86-yard breakaway run against the Seahawks in 2022 versus the Kansas City run he ran for 63 yards in 2023. In 2022, he had a top speed on his longest run of the season of 20.43 miles per hour, according to Next Gen Stats, while in 2023, his long run of 63 yards, he only hit 19.82 miles per hour. So, full half a mile per hour slower. So objectively, his, top speed on his longest run, if you want to use that as a metric for like athleticism, was a good amount lower in 2023 than it was in 2022. So if you want to say, hey, he slowed down a little bit. Now, the other thing I saw some people say is like, oh yeah, came in, out of shape and like worked his way into shape as the season went. And I looked at it and it was, I used the Wayback Machine. If you've ever used that, you can look at old websites or versions of old websites. And, they listed him at 223 pounds this year. They listed him at 220 pounds last year on the Raiders website. So, I mean, they lie all the time on those things, so it doesn't really matter.
Yeah, but we know about what's
there.
actually listed on websites are kind of...
The fact that it's more is
an
interesting.
Approximation.
I'm surprised they didn't just
the
roll
difference
forward.
For a football player, the difference between 223 pounds and 220 pounds is just one dinner.
Is what I was going to say is what they ate for breakfast. And, so I looked at it also like how his like yards per carry and EPA per rush and success rate went like throughout the year as the week by week. And his yards per carry definitely went up. But EPA per rush and success rate both kind of, were pretty noisy. There wasn't any noticeable trend there. So you could say, you argue the yards per carry went up and so he improved as he got in slightly better shape, but I don't know. So kind of to summarize, he was way better in 2022 than 2023. If the Packers can get the 2022 version of Josh Jacobs, hell yeah. Like that's like even better than Aaron Jones. I know that might be blasphemy, but it is. Like he was a first team All-Pro, is the best. He looks, I don't want to say it, but in 2022, somehow out of nowhere, he looked like prime Adrian Peterson, like same 28 and everything. And I'm watching him run. I'm like, where did this guy come from? Because I remember it was like a random breakout season. And then in 2023, there are a lot of theories. Like I said, bad run blocking line. I mean, they weren't great, but by a lot of metrics, they were average. Stack boxes, similar stack box rate to the previous year. Slightly out of shape. Possibly he did get slightly better yards per carry as the season went on, but other metrics stayed around the same. But yeah, so I think the main thing is you hope that he's the 2022 version. And if he's not, at least after a year, you can get out of it. So I guess in that aspect, the risk isn't super high. I still just don't love the idea of like resource allocation wise paying that much to a running back. But Dad, what did you think about this signing? I know I've been going on for a while. What do you think?
Yeah, so one thing that I started thinking about as you talked about his workload in 2022, there's some data out there on, though he may not have reached the threshold on the number of touches, that the year after a running back has like this huge workload, there's always a step back in the next year. Sometimes there's an injury in the next year. And it happened to Derrick Henry 1 year as well. It's like, maybe it's like people get like over 2,000 yards on a season, like the next year, is not as good. But it would be nice to get the 2022 version, maybe not work him so hard, because those runs are like his like jump cuts, change of direction, and his burst and breaking, tackle breaking, it looks fantastic.
No, it's actually insane how good he looks in 2022. Like you watch him in 2022, it's like stiff arm, spin move, juke, like sprint away from the safety and hit the whole. It's like what on earth am I watching? Like this guy is out of his mind. And then in 2023, it's like just looks a little bit slower, like half a step slow. And
yeah, you do see a bunch of plays like juke, 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 and he's like going around like 3 or 4 people and not getting anywhere.
Yeah, I mean, it's true. You watch and there are definitely plays where he's getting hit in the backfield, but at the same time, other Raiders running backs did better behind that line, and a lot of the numbers in terms of like stuff rate and stuff are just like league average, and it's not like the Packers run blocking is great. So, because I mean, we talked about last year, it's like Dylan's like just not able to do anything back there because he doesn't have the juice that Aaron Jones does, where he can make this like terrible run blocking look like average, which is what Jones was able to do. And maybe Jacobs was doing the same thing with the Raiders, but only time will tell. And thankfully, it's only it's kind of a 1 year, and we'll see. So it's not like they're super tied into this long term. But the thing is, it's like if they get 2022 Josh Jacobs, like look out, because that's and he has some pass catching chops. The Raiders didn't use him very creatively, seems to be the consensus in the passing game. But you look at some of his stuff from Alabama, it's like they're running him on vertical routes, like they're trying to hit him down the seam, and maybe they'll be able to give him some more creative usage with the Packers. Dad, anything else you wanted to say on Jacobs, though, or do you want to move on to the other big free agent signing?
We can move on to the other side of the ball, the big signing on the defense.
McKinney. I'm very
Xavier
excited
McKinney.
to watch Xavier McKinney.
Yeah. So the number one safety of the board. It's like
before we talk about any of this, have you been seeing his tweets? They're comedy. They're very funny. He seems like a fun guy.
I've only seen like one. What were they again?
So I mean, he was he was team captain with the Giants like the past like year or so, 2 years. So like big like locker room presence, and he just seems like I don't know if this is old timey, but a hoot and a holler. Like he seems like a funny guy to be around. He'd be a good guy to get a drink with, because he's like tweeting out. He was tweeting like, what number should I wear? Like 29 or 15? And then I guess enough people told him.
That's what I saw.
Enough people told him
15's not available.
Enough people told him that Bart Starr had 15. Right? He was like, "Oh, my bad. Like 15 is Starr." He's like, "Even players make mistakes sometimes. I'll do better." But no, he was funny. And like today, he tweeted out just like, I think just cheese with a bunch of exclamation marks, which is great as well. But no, yeah, go ahead. I'm pumped for this signing. It's very exciting.
Yeah. So it's really exciting actually to sign the top available player at the position, and a player that you'd expect to be better than anybody they're going to get in the draft this year, at where they're drafting at that position. And kind of like it's a perfect fit for what they're looking for their defense. At least it sounds like. They gave him a 4-year deal for $68 million. $23 million of it is guaranteed. It seems to be all in the signing bonus. And the cap hit this year is not that large. So $7.8 million. So it's the kind of thing where they're backloading it. As you mentioned here, like a lot of NFL deals, it's like 2 years and then we'll decide from there because of where the guarantees are. There are no other guaranteed salaries, no other guaranteed roster bonuses, as far as I know. So it gets kind of easier to move on as a 2-year.
Yeah. I think I saw there's like a roster. There's a roster bonus in year 2, if I remember correctly, that
maybe
they'll have to like restructure. But yeah, every NFL contract is a 2-year, and then we'll see. Like almost every single one, unless it's a 1-year, and then we'll see.
Yeah, and so this contract was a little bit higher than a lot of the projections you'd see on PFF or Spot Track, where it was more like 13, 14 million. But it is in line with the top of market safeties, or even the top safeties in the league. This is average per year, puts him 4th in the league among safeties, behind Derwin James, Minkah Fitzpatrick, and Antoine Winfield. Did you get that right?
Yeah, Antoine Winfield. But to be fair, Antoine Winfield isn't even on a contract. Like that's just his franchise tag number. So in terms of multi-year contracts, It is like the 3rd highest paid safety.
Yes, in terms of total value. it's a little different. So I was going by the average. But looking at the numbers from 2023, he was a top 4 safety in a lot of ways. So admittedly, it was his best season. He played every single snap for the Giants on defense in 2023. Played most of his snaps at free safety. This is something we talked about in our free agent wish list episode. But 41% at deep, 34% of his snaps in the box, and 15% in the slot. Among the 104 qualifying safeties in terms of number of snaps in 2023, he was the 4th highest safety in overall defensive grade by PFF in 2023. First in coverage grade among safeties. 7th best in passer rating when targeted, giving up no touchdowns and only 3 interceptions. He had the 3rd best missed tackle rate at only 5.7% in the league among safeties. And compare that to last year's Green Bay's 2 safeties with the most snaps, Owens and Savage, had missed tackle rates of 12.6% and 17.3%. Think about what a difference that is, and how many.
And I think
McKinney's changes how plays are.
Mm-hmm. McKinney's career is like 6.9 or something like that. So last year was a career, so but he's a good tackler. He's just a good tackler.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Some other things he wasn't quite so good at, 39th in stops per snap, which is a tackle that's considered a failure for the offense. But when you have a guy playing deep safety,
I was going to say, exactly.
How often do you expect him to tackle a guy in the backfield or, within 3 yards of the line of scrimmage? It's just, the opportunity is just not there. And then 19th best in yards per target. But again, if you're targeted 20 yards downfield, that's a little different expectation. And the fact that he has experience playing both deep and in the box means that he has some flexibility. I mean, I think one thing, even though Athlete talked about his ideal post safety, he also talked about wanting to be able to switch which of the 2 guys is doing which responsibility, so that you can confuse the defense by having somebody show deep and then having them rotate and change their positions to confuse the defense. And so his ability to play at the different levels gives you that option as well.
Yeah. I mean, and you mentioned how Halfley talked about that post safety. I remember when we talked about it, was like, so you want a perfect player. It's like, so you want a guy who can play free safety, who's rangy, who can go sideline to sideline, who is a great tackler and can erase mistakes on the back end, who can man up against tight ends when he needs to, who can take the ball away, who has ball production. And it's like, where are they going to find this? The answer is right here. Xavier McKinney is that guy. And the fact that they were able to bring him in is just this guy is just so exciting because, I mean, it's the type of player that this defense needs. It felt like a pie in the sky. Like, where are you going to find someone who's good at all of those things? And they went out and they spent big bucks and got him.
Yeah, and I think this is one where, you might have paid a couple million more. Tim was like, so what?
Yeah, what's that $1 or $2 million doing?
The difference you're going to do with those 2 or 3 million is going to have less of an impact on the team than having a potential top player at the position where you had almost nobody on the roster. And it was looking like you were going to have to settle for, hope.
Yeah, praying into that you one of the guys in the draft you took would be ready right away, in a weak safety draft. So yeah.
So I've gone from now taking I've dropped back how early I take a first safety unless somebody falls to an unexpected position. But I think they're still going to take a safety in the draft. But it doesn't. They don't have to early. They don't have to early. Yeah. There are guys there who could be predominantly box players who you could get a decent amount later.
Yeah, and I mean, just to wrap up the McKinney thing, I mean, perfect signing, I think, for this defense, for what we expect this defense to be with a lot of single high, his experience as a free safety. I think, I remember a next gen stats where he led the league in terms of safeties in tight window throws forced at a very high percentile.
I dug that up and I think there was also in that tweet about how Packers were one of the worst in the league enforcing tight window throws. Is in that same tweet. I wish I'd found that tweet for this, but it was really good, and the Packers as a team were one of the worst.
Yeah, I mean, I could not be more excited. Anything you wanted to say to just wrap up the McKinney stuff? I mean, I definitely very, very excited to see him in the green and gold.
Yeah, I've got hope. I'm taking the hopium.
All right, well,
See
let's move
these
on
glasses?
to
I'm sure they must be green and gold. These green and gold,
green and gold, rose maybe.
rose
But
green
yeah,
and gold,
so
rose and gold.
those are the two additions there for the Packers in terms of incoming players from outside the organization. Packers have also re-signed a number of players. So let's start going through those, Dad. The first of those, not necessarily in chronological order, but the first we're going to talk about is Keyshawn Nixon, who they re-signed
Yeah,
to a 3-year,
you could say
$18
first
million
in
dollars.
like dollars allocation
That's
by a
true.
country
They
mile.
re-signed to a 3-year, $18 million deal. And, all pro kick returner, slot corner. To me, I did not love this. I thought this was a little too high of a price to pay for Keyshawn. Especially, I consider him to be, an average to slightly below average slot corner. In 2023, so this is amongst 33 qualifying corners. The data is per PFF. I looked at corners who had played at least 252 snaps and who had played at least 50% of their snaps in the slot. So looking at those 33 qualifying corners, he was 25th in yards per target, 22nd in yards per coverage snap, 10th in stop rate, so stops per total number of snaps, which is good. That's very good. And then 15th in missed tackle rate. So average to slightly below average coverage slot corner, and then a pretty good tackler. I saw some people like hypothesize like, hey, like maybe he'll be their box safety. That intrigues me a little bit. I'm like, oh, that could be interesting. But I don't love the idea of bringing him back on that money as the starting slot corner because I just think they need to upgrade that spot. I think he's kind of at it. So to me, paying $6 million for a guy who's probably a fourth or fifth corner on most teams and then a returner, it just doesn't feel like value there. I would love to see them upgrade that slot corner spot, like either pay like a few more $1 million and bring someone in like Kenny Moore, who got like $10 million a year from the Colts. Now you might never have been able to get him because he maybe wanted to just stay with the Colts, or just go cheaper and then try and draft his replacement. There are a number of good slot corners in this draft. And the thing is, I still think even with bringing Keyshawn back, you need to upgrade that spot. So bringing Keyshawn back does set your floor there, I guess, if for some reason you're not able to bring in a guy in the draft or if the guy you draft like isn't good. But I just don't think you need to pay that much for a floor of slightly below average slot coverage. So I don't know.
Yeah.
And like his value as a returner to me is kind of I don't think kick return matters that much, to be honest, unless
Maybe
they
it'll
know
be
something
more this year
about
with
these.
the change in the rules. With
Well,
going
it's
kind
not
of
official
bonkers.
yet. That's not official yet, but
Okay.
maybe they know a little something about the XFL kickoff rule coming, and if that happens, we'll cover it. But I don't know. I didn't love it. He's a slightly below average slot corner. They're gonna need to draft someone for that spot anyways. And so if and when they do, if they don't, I think it's a mistake because your secondary I don't think is as good as it could be. And if they do, then you're paying like a backup slot corner and kick returner $6 million a year, which doesn't feel great either. Like so,
Yeah.
I don't know. I didn't love the move.
And if you just compare it to his most recent contract, which was after a Pro Bowl season as a kick returner as well, they gave him 1 year for $4 million.
Yeah,
and so when he got a big pay raise for doing it this year.
Yeah, and so it's like I didn't love it. What did you think about the Keyshawn return? I love Keyshawn like as a a presence in the locker room and everything.
I wanted Keyshawn back on the team. I thought they would be able to sign him, but I didn't expect it to cost this much. I thought maybe it would have been $4 million a year, maybe 3 years for 12.
Yeah, and
maybe borderline what he got this year, but multiple years.
Yeah, and maybe we don't know. I don't think we know the structure of this one yet, so maybe the guarantees are lower, and it won't look quite as bad like when you actually look at the whole number. But I just don't think, because I think he's like a average to replacement level slot corner that they're going to need to replace anyway, and so they're paying a bench slot corner and a returner like a good chunk of money. So I don't know. Maybe they don't love the slot corners in this draft, but I like Samer still. I like Jerry and Jones, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't know. I guess
Andrew Phillips has some possibility.
Andrew Phillips from Kentucky
in the Senior Bowl.
Yeah, so I think there are ways they could, improve at that spot, and they didn't need to pay Keyshawn this money. But that's kind of my thought on that. Dad, anything else there? Or did you want to move on to the next re-signing, which I think was maybe even more surprising?
This one was really surprising. This was after they, all the announcements were, well, they're moving on from AJ Dillon. He's not coming back. And then just today, like, oh, AJ Dillon's probably going to re-sign with the Packers. Wait, what? That didn't seem to be the story.
Yeah,
So
I also
and then
said
it just
huh?
got kind of this weird sort of niche story inside of that story where he re-signed on this rare 4-year contract option, which can only be used for re-signing a player who's been under contract for at least 4 years on the same team and been on the active roster. Not as well, it can't be like on the practice squad. And that allows the team to sign a player for 1.4 million over the minimum for that player in terms of the number of years of whatever they call it, accrued service. But only part of the salary actually counts on the cap. So it's like so you basically get to pay somebody almost like 1.4 or 1.5 million that doesn't count on the cap.
Yeah, and from that aspect, I think it makes total sense because like he's counting the minimum against the cap, and then he's making a little bit more. To me, what this tells me is one, the market for him was not great, which kind of makes sense after he struggled last year. He did I think improve as the season went on, where like the success rate felt good. He was churning legs, like he was having he had a good stretch of like successful runs.
Yeah, and then with his injuries at the end of the year with the thumb and stinger, he kind of missed what's usually his best part of the year.
Yeah. And I remember saying, near the end of the year, because I don't want to talk out of both sides of my mouth, where I was like saying, it's like, yeah, no, like Dillon was really bad to start the year. Like you remember him like falling down against Atlanta when like they needed a yard and stuff like that. And then, but then as he improved throughout the year, I remember being like, yeah, if they want to bring him back on like a cheap deal to be like the backup again, like I'd be okay with that. And that's exactly what this is. So I can't say now that it's like this is a great deal in terms of like they're paying him nothing and they're getting him back.
Yeah.
Like there's no real downside here.
I always felt that if they could sign him back for there was no reason not to bring him back if it was a smaller salary. And this is about as cheap a deal as you can get.
Yeah, my only thought is someone said it's a Thunder and Thunder backfield because they just don't really have much speed
but I think,
at the running back spot now. But
Jacobs has some change of direction ability
but not as much top speed. But no, you're right. Yeah, he has more.
But I still think they'll probably draft one running back mid-round, 4th, 5th, 6th rounder as potentially a smaller speed back guy. I've liked, and you mentioned this is a guy from Purdue, Tyrone Taylor,
Tracy, I think.
Tracy, yes, Tracy, who is a former wide receiver turned running back, I think, and he looks good. But there are other guys that could draft as well. As we discussed in the review, Dillon was sort of like a average running back 2. So he was in the high 30s to low 50s in rankings amongst running backs in a number of performance metrics, kind of making him essentially, somewhere as a running back 2, somewhere between 33rd to 64th best running back in the league. And he had a number of career lows as well, like yards, I think, per carry after contact and yards per carry. But he also had his best career year in receiving by PFF grade and a career high in yards after catch per reception. So I think there's something that he can contribute to.
I mean, it was a tough year for him. I think, he just wasn't quite as good, but there's no risk in this, and I don't think it's even very guaranteed either if they end up releasing him if he doesn't make the roster for some reason, which
because the cap hit is so low, there's not going to be much of a cost. But there's no downside to signing him. And as you mentioned to me, the fact that they signed Jacobs and brought Dillon back, does that say something about their opinion of this year's running back class?
It's possible that maybe they just don't like the running backs. I do think the more I looked at the Dillon thing, it was like how could we not do this? Like if it's as good of a deal as you can pretty much get on a running back. Like he's counting the minimum against the cap.
The cheat code of a IRFA, but it's pretty close.
Yeah. But that's pretty much all on Dillon. There's no reason not to make this signing for the money that they're paying him. There's just like not signing that deal would be like malpractice, in my opinion. And like you can say what you want about Dylan. I know some people are concerned like he'd block carries for any rookie that came in, or that he would, take too many carries from Jacobs. And I'm like, he's not that bad where I'm like, it's like a detriment. Well, I mean, there were a couple games where maybe he was, but for the most part, like he's had a pretty, like, he can do good things. He's a good pass protector. He can catch the ball out of the backfield. He's generally like has a good success rate in terms of like churning out yards. He's never going to get very many long yards, but
yeah. And actually his success rate this year was still pretty good in terms of his success rate.
Yeah. But,
per run.
Yeah. But moving on, the next player that the Packers, or is there anything else you wanted to say on Dylan?
No, that's kind of it. They brought it back as a surprise, but it's a good decision, is my overall opinion.
The next player, and this was interesting because this was actually the first move that the Packers announced, was that they re-signed Tyler Davis. It's probably a minimum deal. I don't think we actually know the details yet. He tore his ACL last preseason. He's a tight end. But in 2022, he played in over 70% of Packers special team snaps in every single game. To me, makes sense. They clearly like him. Apparently they had big plans for him in the offense in 2023, and that kind of just went by the wayside when he got hurt. He's a core special teamer, and I guess like it's a pretty no risk thing. My only thought is like I hope this doesn't bump Ben Sims down the depth chart. I still think that all of Kraft, Musgrave, and Sims are better than him. But yeah, to me, it's it's a no-risk signing. He's a core special teamer. If he can bounce back well from that torn ACL, then, let's just run it back and he'll play on special teams.
Yeah, I think you could kind of slot him into what DeGuara's role was last year in terms of number of snaps in the offense.
Yeah, and I don't want to see him
number 4 tight end.
Yeah, I don't want to see him any more than that. So like that would be good. And then 2 more signings, Dad. Who did we have next? 2 more re-signings, sorry.
Yeah, so I just want to say how the Davis one was kind of funny. It's like came so early before anybody else signed with the Packers. Like, the Packers have made their move for free agency. They're done.
That's the priority. The priority was bring back Tyler Davis. Number one priority.
We don't need to do anything more. That's the Packers have finished free agency. But then
they brought back another guy. Yep.
Yeah, so a guy we had talked about would be just between us, I guess, worth bringing back. That was Corey Ballantyne. I don't think the contract details have been released yet. It's a little bit more recent of an announcement, so I don't have the numbers here. I don't expect it to be very high. And what he showed last year was that the defense could survive with him in the lineup last year when they needed him to be, which was what you hope for a guy you expect to be like your 4th or 5th corner. Can you stay afloat when your number 5 corner comes onto the field? And just kind of one thing that he was, kind of good enough against was completion percentage against. He was 31st out of 89 corners in that metric, so he's doing something right. However, his run defense was bad. It was like 95th or something. Yeah, you don't remember what it was. It was bad. But he could cover well enough to not get torched, which is basically what you want when your backup to backup comes out of the field. You don't have a flashing red light over his head that they throw at him every time.
Yeah, and it keeps the Valentine alive. I will say, yep. I think he was honestly even better than just like a replacement level guy. I mean, we talked about in our big defense breakdown this a little bit, amongst like 89 corners who played at least like 534 total snaps on defense. He was 31st in terms of catch rate. He was 48th in yards per target. There were a good amount of numbers where he was, around league average. And for that to be your 5th corner, that's 4th, 5th corner. That's very solid.
If your 5th corner is more like league average than bottom 20% in the league, that's a really good thing.
And there are other numbers where he was, there are other numbers where he was less good, to be fair. But
yes, his run defense was more like the average 5th corner in the league.
Yeah, but the thing is,
you do
he's
remember
solid. He's
thinking
solid.
of this. When we were at this stretch where the defense was actually playing surprisingly well, And that's when we had this stretch with like Ballantyne and Valentine playing a lot of snaps at corners. Like, we're holding up okay.
Yes, it's like we got Valentine, Jonathan Owens, Anthony Johnson, and Keyshawn Nixon. Like, we have the highest drafted guy here is in the 7th round. So, and it's not bad. But yeah, so no, bring Corey Ballantyne back, I assume in on a pretty cheap deal, I think was, no brainer. Like, he's solid depth. And then the last signing was Christian Welch, who the Packers re-signed. Again, we're assuming a minimum deal. Probably is, core special teamer. He played over 50% of special team snaps in 13 games last season for Green Bay per Pro Football Reference. I think it's fine. I think it kind of indicates maybe that they're not bringing Eric Wilson back, although Tom Silverstein did report that they wanted to bring Wilson back, so we'll see on that one, I guess. But yeah, core special teamer brought back for cheap money. I don't think we really need to talk about that one too much, huh?
No, there's not really much being added there. Maybe he's like going to be their Eric Wilson replacement.
Yeah, young Eric Wilson.
So this may mean that there won't be Eric Wilson back on the team.
Yeah.
But I don't think we're going to be seeing him starting on defense anytime soon, I hope.
Famous last words, Dad. Don't.
I know. But I do think like we're going to need to draft at least 2 linebackers, because this is not the free agent linebacker market is not very encouraging.
Yeah, there's only one or two left.
We need more.
Yeah. But anyway,
we need to add at least 2 linebackers.
Yeah. But if we do, we'll have you covered here. We'll be talking about it, so don't worry. If any more moves happen in the next coming week, we'll be talking about it, so don't worry. But yeah, so thanks so much for listening to this free agent roundup. We hope it was as much of a fun roller coaster ride for y'all as it was for us. If you like what you heard here today, come give us a follow on Twitter at FatherSonPacker. We tweet out when we have new episodes out, stats that we find interesting when we're researching for these episodes, pieces of Packers news, articles and content from other content creators in Packersverse that we find interesting. Pretty much one-stop shopping for everything Titletown. And then subscribe to us on your podcast platform of choice, whether that's Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify. We even put all our episodes out on YouTube as well, if you want to check them out there. If you subscribe there, it would really help our numbers, so thank you for that. And on Twitter, we'll be doing Mock Draft Mondays every single week for the rest of the offseason. So if you want to check us out there, once again, at FatherSonPacker, comment, let us know what you think. Let us know if our picks are dumb or if they're really good. Especially let us know if they're really good. But yeah, thank you again so much for listening. We'll be doing one episode for the rest of the offseason every single week. Sorry, not one total episode, one episode a week for the rest of the offseason, and then 2 episodes a week once the season starts off in earnest. But again, thank you so much for listening. And until next time, go Pack Go.
Go Pack Go.